Now sometimes instead of breaking the data up into percentiles, we want to use quartiles, which would be 4 equal parts. So in this case, instead of breaking your data up into 1% little pieces, we're breaking it up into 25% chunks. And so each quartile is a marker that separates those 25% chunks. The first quartile we call Q1. It separates the bottom 25% from the top 75%. Q2 is actually the median because it's at the 50% mark, and then Q3 has 75% below it. To calculate these, you just have to keep in mind that a quartile is 25%. So Q1 would be P25, Q2 would be at the 50% mark, so that'd be P50, and Q3 would be 3/4 of the way, so that would be P75. And then you can just calculate those the way that we did in the last couple of examples. And then the 5-number summary refers to those 3 quartile values plus the minimum, the smallest value in the list, and the maximum, the highest value in the list. And the 5-number summary actually appears when you do the 1var stats on your calculator. So if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of those things that it gives you, you'll see the min, the Q1, the median, which is actually your Q2, and then the Q3 and the max value. Quartiles are a pretty common thing to use in statistics, and once you have the quartiles, you can find what we call the interquartile range, which is how far apart the first quartile and the third quartile are, which really marks off the middle 50%. So the IQR, the interquartile range, is Q3 minus Q1. And one of the reasons this is important for us is that it's actually part of the formula we use to figure out how far out an outlier really has to be. An outlier is 1.5 IQRs below the first quartile or above the third quartile. So for this set of data, let's find the 5-number summary, the IQR, and then use that to figure out if there are any outliers. So I would recommend just doing this on your calculator. So you'll go to Stat Edit and put all of those numbers in, and then go to the 1var stats under Stat Calc, and then scroll all the way down, and that's going to give you your 5-number summary. When you do that, you find the 5-number summary here, minimum 45, Q1 is 75.5, and so on. And then we can use that to calculate the interquartile range. That's Q3 minus Q1. So that's going to give us 15.5. That means the middle 50% of this data falls within a 15.5 point range. Now we can also use that information to figure out whether there are any outliers. So we can take Q1 and subtract 1.5 times the IQR. And that tells us that anything less than 52.25 would be a small outlier. And then we can do Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR, and we find out that anything above 114.25 would be a high outlier. And then if you look back at our numbers, we did have one value less than 52.25, so we have a low outlier at 45, and we did not have any values above 114.25, so we do not have any high outliers. A way to display the 5-number summary visually is something called a box plot. I do have another video posted to show you how to create these box plots in your calculator. However, if you have trouble with the calculator, they're really very easy to draw by hand as well. You would never have to do them on a calculator. So looking at this, you draw an x-axis, and then you start the line at the smallest value, in this case 45. Draw the line over until you get to Q1, and then there's a box in the middle, and the box goes from Q1 to Q3 with a line down the middle to show where Q2 is. And then there's another line coming off from the right over to the maximum value. The lines coming out are called the whiskers, so you sometimes hear this called a box and whisker plot. It doesn't matter how high the box is. There's no Y value on these, only X values. So we're just looking at where it starts on the left and where it ends on the right. And then the width of the box tells you the IQR, and the whole length from the beginning to the end of the lines gives you the range. There's also something called a modified box plot. With a modified box plot, you put an asterisk or a dot anywhere where there's an outlier. So looking at this is the same information. The box still goes from Q1 to Q3, but on the left, the whisker only goes as far as the smallest value that is not an outlier. And then any values lower than that are considered low outliers have asterisks or dots. We had one low outlier at 45, so you can see that really easily with the dot, and you can also tell by looking at this very easily that there are no high outliers. So modified box plots are helpful for identifying where the outliers are. There's really a lot of information in a box plot that I've mentioned. The line down the center of the box gives you the median. You can look at a box plot to estimate the range in the IQR. You can also see distribution and where outliers are. So there's a lot that you can see. For example, here I've got two box and whisker plots from two different classes. So the top box represents one class and the lower box is another. Remember, the Y values don't make any difference on this, just the X's. So looking at the two of these, you can see that the top one, the median, is an X value that's a little bit farther to the right than the one below it. So the first class seems to have a higher median value than the second. Looking at variation, I can compare the range and the IQR. The bottom one has a wider range because the whole box plot, whiskers and all, is wider than the one above it. And then it also has a wider IQR because the box itself is wider than the one above it. As for distribution, you're looking at where the box is on the line. So the first one, the box is not centered on its line, it's off to the right of center. Remember, when you're talking about things being skewed, they're reverse of what you would think. So that would be a skewed left. The high point is over on the right, which means there's more data to the left. And then the one below it is a little bit off center to the left, so it's skewed right, though probably just a little bit. And then there don't appear to be any outliers here. You could kind of eyeball, remember the box gives you the IQR, so 1.5 of the box width above the box and below. Doesn't appear to be. A modified box plot would have made that a little bit more obvious, but in this case it does not look like there are any outliers. So those are the kinds of things that you can compare if you have box and whisker plots or box plots to look at.